Hey, what's up, guys? Thanks for coming back to the Gearland. We're here with Justin Kennedy of Bridge Builder Guitars. Awesome custom instruments. Well, guitars, basically.
Yeah. Build a couple bases.
We're going to check out one of his guitars here. Which model is this one?
This is the EOAD, which stands for Explorer on a Diet.
Explorer on a Diet.
I love it.
These, you were saying, are the pickups that are just temporary, the Fishmans?
No, those are the ones for that one. That is the Fishman modern set. So it's got the ceramic and Alnico. I think the ceramic and the bridge, Alnico in the neck. Don't hold me to that. And then we got the switching for multiple sounds off each pickup. So yeah, and it's also got on the back of it, if you flip it over, the fancy rechargeable Fishman USB.
Oh, is that what that is?
Rechargeable thing. So
that's neat.
No 9 volts.
Oh, no way. That is
so
really sick.
It is fully Fishman loaded. Yeah, there's no going back from that one. That's all. Those are there for the duration.
Life.
Yeah. So
good.
Okay.
I like the commitment.
So Alnico, you can have Alnico pickups. What's the Alnico all about?
It's just the type of magnets that they're using for the material for the magnets. So the Alnico and ceramic are your two primary types of magnets you're going to get for pickups. And this is where I will tell you that I am frets and wood. And I know enough about pickups to get myself into trouble where I'm like, this sounds really good, or this sounds really awful.
And then someone says, that's not right, because in this model, this uses that.
I read on the internet that this is going to be this. So, but have you played it? No, I don't need to play it.
Yeah. I don't know how that
So,
goes.
yeah, it's typically how it goes.
I've got an impulse response of it.
Yeah, so I've read by several people who I trust. All right, that have your ears and your amp in your hands.
Well, the only reason I was wondering if those were the official pickups is just because I think last time you told me you might be putting some Lawlers in it or Dragonfire or something like that.
I've used Lawlers on a bunch of guitars. Lawler is probably the one that I've done the most of. Their Imperial set is pretty much my favorite humbucker. It's just great, just good classic. I mean, it's like if you took everything that could be fixed with a humbucker, a traditional sort of humbucker, and just cleaned it all up. The Fishmans for actives are definitely my favorites.
Oh, by far.
Yeah, they clean up nice. It's kind of like for years, everybody, if you just wanted actives, you just had EMGs, and then there was some guys that are like, I will try the blackouts, the Seymour Duncan blackouts, but the Fishmans come in and they kind of have, for active pickups, they're typically kind of sterile and dry. They still have a pretty good soul. So you get a little bit more lively tone, a little bit more flexibility, while still being able to kind of get that high gain, like just ripping, like rock tone. So
this thing is definitely impressive. So I got 10,000 questions, I'm sure, that will all not be answered, but that's okay.
I'll just lie and give you the best answers I can make up.
That's the best kind, generally. It's every politician ever. So what made you want to start building guitars, first of all?
I was obsessed with basses.
Okay.
Actually, I'm a bass player.
Wouldn't have guessed that.
Yeah, so it's like you can build the motor but can't drive the race car. So for me, it started as just basically being a gearhead on bass stuff. But what ended up happening, and this is the very compressed version of this, is that I kind of, as an adult, as I started working on guitars for a living more, I started realizing that as much as I love playing bass, I couldn't ever build myself a bass that I'd be happy with because like I'm too close to the forest with it, you know? So like I can kind of emotionally like break away from a guitar to like have a little bit more of an unbiased view of it. But I still wanted to apply all the cool stuff that I think is awesome on bass lutherie that that bass players have had for 40 years. Cool exotic woods, like super like above average, you know, construction methods and kind of experimental new finishes and all kinds of just crazy stuff like that. That guitar, for most of the last 70 years of electric guitars, it's been Gibson, Fender, or some subsidiary flavor off of that. And really in the last 10 years, you've seen a lot of guys kind of say, we don't need to have those two chocolate and vanilla flavors. And for me, I kind of look at it as I wanted to build guitars because I wanted to bring something that wasn't entirely there before. At least I could express myself in something, I guess, artistically that wasn't necessarily, I felt 100% all the way there. So I guess does that make sense? Is that too long, convoluted? I don't know. So
Leo Fender didn't play guitar at all, yet he was, you know, one of the most influential amp and guitar designers of all time. So no, I get it. Like the layers you got going on, what wood composition are we looking at?
So this particular one is the top and back is Ohio grown red maple from a tree harvested about 15 miles away from us in Lebanon, Ohio. The core is Honduran mahogany that actually came from one of the guys who I learned how to do a bunch of lutherie stuff from is a guy named Tom Weber. And Tom, I guess, gets to go down in history as Eddie Van Halen's last guitar tech.
Wow.
From 2007 till he died, or 2006. He worked for Ed for a long time. But Tom had that particular piece of Honduran mahogany stashed away in his shop since the early 90s. And he moved shops about 5 years ago. And he's just like, hey, if you want some of this stuff, you can have it. So that's the body on that is the core, top and back, mahogany, maple, top and back. The neck is Eastern rock maple. And then the pinstripe layers that we do in there that are just kind of the decorative sort of fun things are alternating layers of holly and I believe dyed poplar to get that black.
I was going to ask if that's actual surface finish or if it's individual layers, so it is layers.
All the way through the guitar.
That's
so that's
incredible.
how you get all those, like as you do the bevels, you get all the kind of looks like rings of Saturn in places and that sort of stuff. That is all in the construction of the instrument.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
So those rings, to get those rings, are you just taking like a really thin outline of the shape and just
No, what we end up doing is it's kind of the alembic hippie sandwich, where you start with the core woods, which in this case is mahogany, and then we just glue thin pieces of wood, and then you make a big block out of these multiple pieces, and then you just cut the guitar out of it.
Wow.
So each one of those layers represents about, in terms of milling, machining, gluing, all that stuff, each one of those layers is about 45 minutes of time.
Wow.
So for getting it on a guitar this big anyway, to get everything jointed and
yes, because that's, I mean, this is a lot of lost material right here that people don't think. Same thing with down here, I'm sure. If you're going to cut it straight.
In fact, on this one, I was just telling, or actually there was a guitar that just came in earlier today. That's the sister instrument to this one. It literally is from the same tree.
Yeah. Oh wow, that's cool.
So the same wood came out of the same tree. In the back of that one, there was still bark at the very tip of the top horn on the back of it, and we were able to sand it out, so we missed the bark by about 1/8 of an inch.
That's awesome.
On the guitar. So,
wow.
the fingerboard on this is Macassar ebony.
I was going to ask that. It definitely looks like ebony, but with the, has more of the mocha tints in the center.
Yeah,
I like that.
It's kind of like, visually speaking, it's not as plain as regular ebony. It's a little bit more stable. In terms of like regular ebony has more of a propensity to dry out and crack, where the Macassar doesn't seem to have that. So.
Okay, that's cool.
So yeah.
The bridge is the first thing, a bridge builder, guitars. I would hope the bridge would catch your eye in some way. Talk me through this, what the rationale for this is.
That particular bridge is the Hipshot Baby Grand. I'm a huge fan of the of that bridge. I say that, and then I've kind of like done a 50-50 split of that and another bridge on my other builds, where I've used that and the Shaler Hans bridge. But this particular bridge, one of the things I really love about it, that kind of lines up with the kind of MO of how I view instrument design with a lot of stuff, is that it has a lot more string, and this is what they say if you're reading on the Hipshot website, that they want more string behind the bridge on the low strings and less on the high.
That makes sense.
And it's a Stradivarius thing that he believed you had to have X amount of string behind the bridge and X amount past the nut as well. Physics will tell you that it
doesn't really
matter. They're going to say that, like, from the saddle to the nut,
this is your effective tension here.
Exactly. But I've seen enough stupid stuff that I'm like, man, why not try?
Right.
Like Federa basses, a lot of times on their 5 strings will use an extended B headstock.
Yeah.
Where they put their B string tuner at the very tip. One of the basses that I had from, there's 2 guys I trained with, Tom Weber, being Eddie Van Halen's tech, another guy named Matt Friedman, who ran Acacia Instruments in Pennsylvania out near Philly. Not to be confused with Acacia guitars now, but it's Acacia basses in the 80s and 90s. And I had a couple of basses that Matt had built, and the same thing, they were virtually identical, but the headstock shape was different.
Okay.
And on those, with the B string sitting further past the nut, it had a noticeably more taut B string.
I've always thought that about these kind of reverse headstocks as well.
So it's, physics says it should only matter from the bridge to the nut, but, for me, I'm like, there's enough. Who knows? It's all crazy shit anyway. It's all, we're talking about instruments made out of dead trees.
Right.
So at the end of the day, why not try something? And if it works, cool. If it doesn't, who knows? Maybe it's just something in our heads.
Right.
But that particular bridge, the whole point of this question, puts more meat, more string behind the saddle on the low strings than it does on the highs. And again, to do the reverse on the headstock, that's one of the reasons I love the reverse headstock so much. I try to talk guys into it when I'm doing custom commissions. Typically, if I'm doing a build just for me to build an instrument for stock, I like to go with the reverse headstock. Okay. Just because, again, more low string tension past the nut. Maybe it does nothing, but, I seem to notice a difference. But again, I'm just a bass player.
Yep, sure. Well, there is something to it because, personally, I hate string throughs for that very reason. I feel like there needs to be something there that's not. So maybe it's all in my head. I don't care, but I agree with you on that point.
And the string through thing, because the other bridge I lean heavy on is the Shaler Hans bridge. And one of the things that I really do appreciate about the Hans, and any other string through bridge for that matter, like even a string through telly, you've seen all kinds of V's and Schecters and everything with the stuff. If you go to the physics side of it, where you take yourself out of the design part of it, on an acoustic guitar, what drives the top, the resonance of an acoustic guitar, is the torque that the strings generate on the top. So if you think of the top of your guitar, you have your ball ends down here, your saddle going up, your strings coming across these things. The taller your saddle, the more those ball ends will torque the top, the more the top will vibrate, the louder the guitar. I think it's one of those things that, if you apply it to an 1/8 inch top acoustic guitar, it does something, but on an 1.5 inch thick or 1 3/4 inch thick instrument, it might not affect it, but physics tells me you're still torquing that wood.
Absolutely.
So, I've found that, again, talking about the other bridge that we use, I do some internal structures on my guitars that I think get accentuated a little bit by string through body instruments that, I just kind of happen to stumble upon. And on the next couple of builds I've been really trying to dial in that resonance generation that you can get by running the strings through the body, and how you manipulate the cores of the instruments to accentuate the resonance that the guitars can generate from that.
Yeah, I think there's something to that. Even if there's no repeatable tonal difference, it is a feel thing, and
totally,
and people will react differently to that.
And even again, to go back to even just a small physics thing, bass players, again, me being from that school primarily, talk about the difference between string through body and bridge loading bass strings. The original Fender basses in the 50s were all string through body. Right. They kind of abandoned that style of string install in the late 50s, early 60s. And then you see this thing in the late 90s where a lot of guys start doing the bridge, the string through the body again, and people bass players were swearing up and down, like, I feel like there's more tension on it.
Yeah.
I feel like, and all I can think of is if you're putting more torque onto that saddle by, instead of having a string, if this is your saddle height, your string's breaking like that, your string's now breaking like that underneath it, that break angle is going to be more tension onto that saddle.
Right, because there's a vertical component to it now.
Exactly. So if you've got more torque to push down on that saddle, you will hopefully transfer more vibration back into the body, as opposed, that's going to have more than that will. So
right.
That's all I can think of is the hair-splitting physics of that stuff.
Sure, yeah.
So, but anyway.
Yeah, you like what you like regardless. And
yeah.
I mean, I think it works very well for this instrument. Speaking of debatable tonal implications, bolt-on neck.
Yes.
So what's your choice for that?
All right, so again, going back to the bass school of things, when Mike Tobias, I think it was after he sold Tobias guitars to Gibson in the 90s, he had a bunch of time, and he had sent, and I might be wrong on this, but this is, again, recalling from 20 years of haze.
Sure.
And there's been a lot of drinking in the last week and a half of my life, so that's just the immediate past.
Sure.
But he had built 2 identical instruments and sent them out to Bell Labs to get tested with a bunch of stuff. And one of the things that he had done through all these tests was he tried to make, well, he made some were identical, some had little differences, but he did tests on bolt-on neck instruments and neck-through instruments. And what they found was that bolt-on instruments, some of them would not produce the same frequencies as a neck-through or a set neck instrument would produce. But what they found happening is the same effect that if you're a guy with a low voice and you call somebody on the phone speaker can't produce those low frequencies.
Anyway, right.
Yeah, those speakers can't produce it. But what ends up happening is the person listening hears everything that's just fine, because the human brain fills in the spaces that are
Exactly.
missing. So inherently what I've done is made an instrument that doesn't sound as good when you put it on a spectrometer. But when a human brain listens to it, you're hoping that those frequencies get filled in with what the person wants to hear.
Sure.
So that's the sonic component of it. From a luthier standpoint, and from 10 years...
I know this answer.
Yeah, from 10 years of working on guitars, every guitar I build, I want to outlast me by hundreds of years. When you go to museums and you can see high quality violins or old instruments that are actually still playable, they've been maintained, but more importantly, they've been built properly from the start. So, and there's even stuff like, one of my friends has an incredible, like probably $250,000 upright bass, and he ended up having a bunch of work done on it and everything like that. But one of the things that happened is, since this instrument was built well and was built to a certain specification, not necessarily specific, but like a certain style of build where it's repeatable down the line and people have a skill set to service it, that instrument, even though it's 150 or 175 years old, was able to be repaired and its life extended by another 60 or 70 years. And the same thing applies to modern electric instruments. The Fender guitar has become a standard of what we consider quality instruments, at least from the 20th century now into the 21st century. So that being said, this instrument with a bolt-on neck is basically pretty much standard Fender spec at one end of it, but it's obviously modified. It's not a Fender neck heel,
Sure.
that sort of stuff. But 100 years from now, some sort of artisan, if this neck ever twists, warps, breaks, becomes unusable, can fabricate a new neck that will fit this with relative ease, and whoever gets it can still keep playing this instrument for another 50, 60 years is the goal. Now, hopefully, by constructing it the way I've done, that's a non-issue. But if it ever gets to that point, again, doing repairs for more than a decade now, you're amazed at the things that you see. And if you have an instrument that's a neck through, a set neck, and you have a catastrophic neck, whatever, breakage, failure, wood problem, whatever causes that neck to no longer be a functional instrument neck, it's far easier to replace a bolt-on neck than it is a neck through. The instrument's toast.
Absolutely.
If it's set neck, you're looking at major surgery, tons of reverse engineering. So this is just the repair guy in me.
Okay.
This is just me saying, this is what I want to work on.
Yeah. No, I totally get it. There's the whole argument about this having more sustain, and then bolt-ons having more attack and snappiness and those sort of things. And I don't know. There's no data to really support any of it.
I have
than
great
just,
data on sustain.
I would love to see
This
that.
is perfect. If you worry about sustain, you're stupid.
Yeah, exactly. That's been my argument from the get-go.
If there's a great thing, again, bass guys. Carl Thompson, who built Les Claypool's basses, was the guy who built the first modern six-string bass. If you've run out of everything on YouTube, there's a great thing that he has called Life Beyond the Third Fret with Carl Thompson, and I've probably watched it like all 4 parts like 5 times. and you watch the first one's got like 50,000 views, the next one's got like 4.
Yeah.
By the time you get to the third one, it's just me clicking.
Yeah, you with the one like.
But one of the things that Carl says in this thing, in this really...
Let me stop you right there. We're just running out of a take.
Sorry.
And you're just starting into a good story.
Yeah.
So I don't want you to get half.
Good.
Everything's rolling. Okay, go for it.
All right, so my rant on sustain.
Sure.
We'll start. Carl Thompson has this great thing on YouTube, a real great series that you should, if you're interested in building instruments and things like that, you should just watch, just because he has a very unique perspective on stuff. But one of the things that he says about sustain, and this was, again, it was just watching this as a guy who was, I think when I watched it the first time, I'd probably been working on guitars for a couple of years, but obsessed with bass for half a lifetime. Is he's just like, sustain's overrated. It's something to that tune. And he's like, how many times are you playing at 30 beats per minute holding whole notes?
Unless you're in a doom metal band and then you're standing in front of a 500-watt stack anyway.
And that's his thing. And that's one of the things that he says in there is he's like, what's more important for an instrument is that it's lightweight, it balances, and the notes bloom and attack off of it faster. And for guitars especially, unless you're playing jazz, which if you're playing jazz, you're probably not interested in one of my guitars anyway. Like, if we're being perfectly honest, you're going to go for a more traditional, most traditional jazz anyway, is going to go for the traditional arch top, the big box guitars. But for most modern players, pardon me, you're going to be playing with an amp that's going to have overdrive, that's going to be able to sustain. But you're going to, more importantly, be playing music that you're not just going for 4 minutes. And if you are, like you said, you're going to be standing in front of a big stack. You're going to be doing something that's going to both literally and figuratively amplify the sustain that you have going, whether it's through manipulation of pedals or feedback or amps or however you wanted to do it. So for me, sustain, somebody comes in and starts talking about sustain, I'm like, shut up. I'm just like, I'll cater to them. I will say, hey, I'll help you with this, but I want to get you a better understanding of an instrument. And what is truly important is, like what Carl says, can you play it all night and your back not hurt? When you play it, how fast does that note, when you play it, reach its full potential? If you were to put it on a spectrometer or whatever and watch that note hit, how fast does it hit the furthest point of its bloom from the attack to the decay at that widest point? How close is it to that attack?
Sure.
Because if you can get it right there next to that attack, that note is going to sound better. That instrument's going to sound better and have more energy transfer through it than it would if you have to sit and wait for it to.
And it feels more responsive to the player. And
exactly. And that's kind of the thing about it. And again, for this thing, when we talk about it being the Explorer on a diet, the whole point is you can play a big body Explorer and not have it hurt your shoulder. Play it if you want to play, and if you're in a cover band and you're playing for 3 hours. You can play it and you're not going to hurt the next day. If you run around on stage, if you're active or whatever, you don't want your instrument to hurt you. Everything should be, with an instrument, should be more conducive to you so you can get the music out of your head and out of your hands faster and easier. I mean, everything down to, when we talked about the reverse headstock earlier, part of the other great thing is it takes less muscles to do this than it does to do this.
That's true.
So when you talk about the ergonomics of it, it's just little things like that all go into it. So I think I got sidetracked on sustain.
No, that's great. That's something, that example is something I don't even think about. Aesthetically speaking, I like symmetrical headstocks that have 3 and 3 or 4 and 4. But no, I mean, that's you don't think about that kind of stuff if you're sitting in front of a computer all day like I am in the studio. Guys that actually make a living on this stuff, that's probably a little more important.
Well, it's just one of those things. The guys who, again, I'm not a guitar player, and Leo Fender wasn't a musician. leave the nerd stuff to the nerds and go play music.
Right.
You know, like I think that's what it's really about. Is like I'm fully retired from playing. I play router table and bandsaw now. so for me, like it's important that when I hand somebody an instrument, especially one that I've designed or built, that when they take it, there's no hindrance to that player. Like whether it's in terms of action, in terms of fret stuff, in terms of feel, in terms of weight, that there's no speed bump between brain, hands, and instrument. So that's the goal.
I can definitely abide by that philosophy. I'd like to grind on this thing for a little bit more, if you don't mind. Yeah, the pick that I dropped like an idiot.
I wanted to ask about like the philosophy of like the string tension. Because I tend to like the string tension like a little bit looser, I guess.
Okay.
Like the tight stuff, it's not like it's harder to do bends. I mean, you do need to put more effort into it, but from a feel standpoint, like a looser string tension is what I go for.
Yeah.
So for that saddle and the, like that vertical, the vertical
offset
like,
here.
offset
or
right
like
there.
like how we're going string through body versus like string through the bridge sort of thing.
Yeah, does that make it more conducive to being tighter action, or
potentially
is that what you were talking about?
A little bit, you know, the whole thing when you talk about string tension, again, we can talk all the string through body and headstock stuff. It's all a little bit of snake oil. What really matters is the physics of it. So if you have, for instance, you have a Gibson scale 24 5/8, you have a Fender scale 25 1/2, a little bit longer. If you put a set of 10s on each of those instruments, all things being equal, like bridges, headstock shapes, everything's equal, but just the scale length's different, that Fender is going to feel tighter than the Gibson because of the scale length. Now you can compensate for that, again, by, if you take the physics side, all right, the Fender generates X amount of pounds per square inch of pull at 25 1/2 inches with a set of 10s. If you want to match that on the Gibson, you can move up a gauge of strings.
10 1/2 or
10 1/2, 11s. Yeah, so that will give you, from a tension standpoint, the same sort of thing.
Yeah.
Now, that all gets thrown out the window when we all start playing our instruments individually. Because somebody's 9s on a Strat is perfect, but you put those same 9s or get even the same balance, that same tension on a Gibson, it doesn't feel right for them. Some people's hands just want something different on each instrument. Some people want the same, and that's multitudes of things. So the very short answer for for this is there's a lot of things that affect string tension. If you like them loose, the best thing to do from just the broad strokes is find the gauge strings that feels the best for you on the guitar in question. Because some guitars are going to have a string through body or a longer reverse headstock might make a string feel more stiff on an instrument. So that instrument, like, well, maybe on your Gibson, you're like, I like 10s, but maybe on an instrument like this with a longer scale length, with the more tension, if the snake oil is working on these strings, maybe you'll want something like a set of 9s on there to get that same tension feel.
Well, what if you like the feel of 10s, but you don't like the tension? I mean, is there any like compensation for that? Is it like a truss rod thing at that? Well, maybe not. Because...
Well, no, the setup plays a part of it too. Again, working on guitars for a decade plus, the setup is as important as any of those other factors. One of the guys who worked for BC Rich, Neil Moser, who makes Moser guitars, or Mosier, I'm not sure if I'm saying Moser or Mosier. Anyway, really good luthier. I was watching a video of his a couple weeks ago, and he was talking about, going back to sustain, but this kind of ties into what you're talking about, is he's like, at BC Rich back in the 70s, he's like, we just figured out if you got them set up right, they're going to sustain right anyway. And the setup thing goes to that same thing of like, well, if it's set up right, it's going to feel, a set of 10s might feel slinkier with the right setup than a set of 9s will. And it just comes to personal preference and, again, matching up your hands with the setup, the string on a particular instrument. So that's my whole life, man.
That's why Strings by Mail is one of my favorite websites ever, because you can just pick the individual gauges and you solve all these problems.
And I talked to this like veteran like jazz musician. He's got like a club in like downtown Cincinnati. His name's like Ed Moss. and he was just like, hey boy, with your like shoulder length, you should be a bass player. What are you doing playing guitar? And you know, clearly it's because, you know, I want more versatility with like the harmonies, blah blah blah. But like,
that guy used to like be a football scout and say, with your size, you should play linebacker.
Well, yeah, he used to be on the basketball team.
Yeah.
well, when he said that, like, it made sense to me. Like, if your shoulders like are wider, the bass has like a larger scale, so like, you know, it's more ergonomic. But
I don't know, man. I feel like if you want to play an instrument and you can physically do it, play what you want.
Right.
I'm a short, fat guy with stubby sausage fingers, and I can play the fuck out of a bass. So, that being said, you know, Joe, who works for me, who there couldn't be, like, more physically opposite dude working in my shop than me. Joe's, you know, over 6 feet tall, big burly dude, looks like he would walk up to that guy and be like, you should play bass. Joe slams on guitar.
Okay.
But you hand him a bass and he's kind of a little lost. So, you know, but sometimes it's finding the right instrument though, because for me, I played long bass. In fact, one of the coolest purchases I ever made as an adult was I finally bought, about 10 years ago, I got a Carl Thompson bass.
Oh, wow.
That I owned for a while. It was the most expensive thing I ever bought that wasn't a house or a car.
I'm sure.
It was ridiculous. 36-inch scale length on the thing. So like a standard Fender's 34, a modulus, or in some 35.
Yeah.
what's the Thunderbird for the Gibson?
34 and a quarter, I believe.
That one's pretty long
is
scale.
it 30? It's a. I can't remember I think the Rick is 33 and 3/4.
They're shorter scale.
They're like 33 and 3/4, just a little bit shorter than a Fender. I feel like the Thunderbird is like a 1/4 inch longer than a Fender. Don't hold me to that. It's all kind of jumbled in my brain. The real Thunderbirds anyway, like the new ones you get from Fun are all 34. But for me, I had this Carl Thompson, this 36-inch scale, and that B string was thunderous on it, on this 5-string, but like, again, sausage fingers. So like, I ended up selling it and going back to a 30. Actually, I went to, after that, a fan fret instrument that was 34 to 35-inch.
That's my next probably bass purchase, is a fan fret.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then after that, now my main instrument, fast forward 9 years after that purchase, my main instrument is a 33-inch scale 5-string. So a little bit shorter than a standard one, and it's just like, this is perfect for my sausage fingers, and I can play bass on it.
That's great.
Even being short and not broad-shouldered, kind of, I mean, I guess being a fat guy, that works for playing bass. So hope that answers the string tension question. I have a tendency to go on tangents.
Well, it was more like, you know, when we were talking about like everything like fitting in its place, and the comment about like the setup made me think about that, you know, just like ergonomically, like people's sizes and like the features that they have might dictate what they decide to play, like by nature or something like that.
You know, it's maybe. I like to believe that we all have free will and we can choose what we want to play.
It's not like a North Korea situation.
No, not yet. Not yet. If Gibson had their way, it would be.
I can't say anything because I'm making an instrument that's shaped too much like an Explorer.
I can, yeah.
But no, I think it comes down. It's funny that I'll see guys and girls come in here too. That, you know, like, and if you're going to go off traditional stereotypes, which this is not how I feel. I'm going to say this straight to the camera. I do not feel this way. So, but I'm just saying for instance.
Don't worry, we'll edit it later.
Yeah, you're like, why is
we'll chop this out.
Why is this guy talking about like eugenics and his race theory? Anyway, so I do work for this very lovely lady who comes in, and she plays bass hard. I mean, like, thumps at it. And she's like 5'2", maybe like 100 pounds, like sopping wet. You know, like, you think that, again, if you're some like dude who owns a jazz club, like, son, let me tell you, you should be playing bass guitar. You know, like that guy's probably gonna be like, here you go, Toots, here's your ukulele. You know, yeah, it's got 4 strings. Go on, sister. You know, like, so for me, like, you can't judge how somebody should play by what they look like, what they do. You have to judge it by their skill set. You know,
sure.
so,
yeah, totally.
Yeah, so if it comes in, and if somebody comes in and says like, hey, you know, I want to play with 9s, and I watch them play, I'm like, dude, you play like a gorilla. You really need 11s and high tension wires because your guitar is
bridge cables.
Yeah, like your action should be this high off the board because otherwise you're going to make it buzz. You know, it just comes down to what everybody's physical traits are for how they've developed playing the instrument.
Sure.
Not so much what their physical traits are on what their clothes size is, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
yeah, absolutely.
Probably do it for the mark. It's good. My Neanderthal hand is used to having like that much space between the bridge pickup on a Gibson guitar, so I'm like, well, don't dig in. You don't have to. Don't go crazy on this.
We can take the pickups down if you need us
No,
to.
no, it don't have. This is the right way to do it. I'm just used to compensating for crap. So. not used to the radius, but it's cool.
It's wild.
Yeah, I like that a lot. That is something to behold.
What's this tremolo right here?
That is actually a Wilkinson tremolo, and then actually the clutch in the arm, I just haven't put on it yet.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
So it's not just like, hey, why is there a gaping hole in this bridge?
Is that the truss rod adjustment
That's
back
the truss
here?
rod adjustment on the back.
That's slick.
Again,
That's a
these
cool move.
guitars are, they were way ahead of their time 25 years ago. They're still like the top cutting edge of what you could get even by today's standards.
Oh yeah, for
Just
sure.
the carbon fiber construction, the way that they did the tops, and the way that it's made. There's like no other guitar like that.
Now this is a museum piece. That's good purchase for yourself. That's for sure.
Beats other things I bought for myself.
408.
What brand is this saddle over here?
That's a Wilkinson bridge.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you don't see them often.
Yeah, they're still in production. They get used on a bunch of different brands now. Like I said, I won't lie. I've bought this just for me. I just love these guitars. Like, you work on enough stuff, and you're like, what's the mechanic drive?
Right.
You know, like that sort of stuff. And that's like the same sort of thing where it's like that for me. I'm like, these are some of my favorite guitars to work on. I had a buddy of mine, a guy named Andrew Howard, who sadly just passed away about a couple weeks ago. And
Sorry to hear that.
it happens. So none of us get out of this world alive. So, but all that being said, is Andrew had a bunch of these, and I remember seeing the first one, and I'm like, man, this thing's sweet. Then I worked on it, and it was just as killer as I thought it was. And then seeing his and a couple other ones come in over the years, I'm like, I want one of mine. I had a chance to buy this one at a pretty reasonable price, and I'm like, I'm jumping on that. And I actually used to belong to Fred Gretsch, the guy that started Gretsch Guitars. His son was the original owner.
No kidding.
Of that guitar.
That's cool. Small world.
Yeah, so I'm like, yeah, and that dude had a killer guitar collection.
Oh, I would hope so.
Yeah.
If your last name's Gretsch, you got to get this thing for a spin. Dial in as you see fit. that thing's meaty. Like even on the treble strings, it's got a lot of body to it.
Yeah,
It's more
big fat sound on this
more,
one.
Yeah, more than PRS or other super strats might be.
It's interesting. Like the ergonomic, like I say ergonomics. I don't know any other way to say it, but you can really like dig in really comfortably to these frets. Like
Yeah. I'm pretty sure he was using stainless steel on these things. Like one of the first guys to use stainless.
To do that back
Don't hold
then.
me to that, but I'm pretty sure that he was using them then.
There you go.
Man, it's just, again, for a guitar that's 25 years old.
Yeah,
It
it still seems contemporary. It's why
Yeah.
I thought it was one of the other M brands. But once I saw the headstock and feature set,
they still make like the iGuitar
Yeah.
and stuff like that, but the imports just aren't the same as these original ones.
never are.
oh, you want to plug in the rectifier?
Yeah, we'll do that.
And then you guys got a split.
Yeah, we'll get some chugs going on the other one and
Make that Ola England guy happy.
yeah. She chugs. Thank you. Piece of art, man.
All right.
It's killer.
Does it have the Plague Scythe stamp?
That it does.